What is my own relationship with myself? What does that look like? What does it mean to be who I am? What's my story? I don't know. I was a parentified child. So when you're a parentified child, you don't really think about your boundaries. You don't think about, what you are responsible for and what others are responsible for. We assume that, once you've forgiven, things should bounce back. But actually the healing journey can sometimes take longer than the actual trauma journey. And so moving forward doesn't mean moving fast. I think that's important for all of us to hold as we navigate through that healing.
Thank you so much for being a part of our growing community. It honestly is just such an honour and such a dream to see how Magnify is growing. For anyone who's new to our channel, Magnify is a network, community and platform focused on empowering ambitious women of faith to thrive in our various spheres of influence.
And we know how important it is to have safe, honest, authentic conversations as women of faith. And so we want to provide a space to do that.
My name is Ruth and I'm the founder and CEO of Magnify.
And my name's Rachel and I'm part of Team Magnify. We'll be your hosts and we'll also be featuring guests each time.
So if you like our content, don't forget to like and subscribe and most importantly, share with a friend who you think would benefit.
On the Magnify podcast today, we are joined by Regina Quartey and MARYANE MWANIKI. We're going to be talking a little bit today about navigating complex family relationships. But to begin with, it would be great to hear first from you, Regina, a little bit about your childhood and maybe some of the values that have shaped who you are today.
So for me, I was raised by my biological mum from up to the age of 7 years old. She separated from my dad before I was born. And I think seeing her work as a single mother, she was really climbing the airline industry before she got sick. She was pursuing an MBA whilst, working full time and managing me. And it was difficult for her. But I think just seeing that drive that she had because she had me, that's always been a value that I've had. And I definitely carry that in how I live my life now and trying to do my best for my son and my family.
Yeah, so it's had quite a big impact on you then.
Huge.
Yeah, amazing. How about you, MARYANE?
Yeah, I think for me, I've got a blended family. So I've grown up as the eldest child of 3 here, but I'm actually number 21 of my father's kids. So I've gone through the eldest child, middle child, and last born direction of things in family. So very complicated, yeah.
And you've had an experience of being all of those different kids in the family.
Different times, but mainly the eldest child.
Yeah, amazing. Regina, can you tell us a little bit more of your experience just with some of the complexities of your family relationships?
Yeah, so I have 2 dads and 3 mums. So I have my biological mother, my stepmother, because my dad got remarried, and my adopted mother. Then I've got my adopted father and my biological father. And navigating all those different parental relationships has always been quite difficult for me, especially through the context that I was also in and out of foster care throughout my life. So trying to, always connect with somebody, whether it was a foster carer, whether it was a teacher, whoever was kind of present in my life was always something that I was looking for. So when it came to a point where, now I'm 21 and all my parents somehow are in my life, how do I navigate loyalty? How do I navigate respect when one is saying go left and the other saying go right? Who do I listen to? And I think ultimately, God is my father, and he gave me a lot of wisdom in how to navigate some of those situations.
It's interesting that you mentioned God as a father, because my guess is that word was a little bit complicated as you were growing up and having so many different representations of parents, but seeing God as your father, how has your identity been affected kind of in those complex family relationships?
I'd say for me, before the complexity of family, it was the complexity of where do I fit? Yeah. I never felt that I fitted anywhere. And before I was even 11 years old, I'd been to 17 different schools, because every time you have to go to a different foster home in a different part of the country, you have to move to a different school. So for me, actually, for a long part of my life, it was actually finding my fit within school. People asking, oh, where's your mum? Why is, a white person picking you up? Why is an Asian person picking you up? Who's that? And actually feeling shame that I didn't have the normal upbringing that everybody else had. So that was probably something I battled with quite a lot first. And then that shame turned into guilt when I'm trying to navigate, the process of going from being a foster child to being adopted, but my mum is still there. She's just mentally not able to look after me. You feel like you've, turned your back on the person that brought you into this world. And I think that was probably one of the hardest things that I've had to go through.
Yeah. And MARYANE, just from your experience as being a counsellor, what are some of the challenges you've seen people with difficult family relationships like this situation? What are some of the challenges you've seen them go through in terms of their identity? And even just, as you said, Regina, like feeling shame and feeling guilt, and how that has such a huge impact on your life, especially in those early years.
Yeah. Those are such tender years where your identity is being shaped. And actually it's really difficult because there isn't that secure base. There's a constant changing, the hellos and the goodbyes. And so actually a lot of clients I work with who have similar stories to yours, Regina, there's that sense of actually, what does it mean to be me? What is my own relationship with myself? What does that look like? What does it mean to be who I am? What's my story? I don't know. And then when they go into relationships, and usually romantic relationships, it's really difficult for them to build that sense of trust because they don't know if their partner's going to stay, because they don't have that template or that grounding of actually belonging to something that's concrete, that's there. And so there's a real difficulty in intimacy and connection, I find, with my clients. Yeah.
And for you, just as a woman of faith, what kind of role would you see faith play in the middle of dealing with those challenges? Like, how have you seen faith work out through that?
Yeah, I think what's really beautiful about reading the Bible is that you just see normal human beings who go through the ebbs and flows of life. You start off at the beginning of the Bible and you have the first family. Straight away, there's conflict. Adam blaming Eve. Their children don't get along. You have your first murder. And so actually, my faith allows me to be anchored in the fact that as a human being, I carry vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And actually, my source of strength and anchoring has to come from God. Who else?
Yeah, absolutely. What does that look like for you then, Regina? I'm not sure, what's your story of faith? Did you come to faith when you were a child, or has this been something for you that's been as an adult? Did you have faith to play a role at that time? Yeah.
So my biological mother, she raised me initially Roman Catholic. And I actually went to a French-speaking Roman Catholic school in London. So there was also that element of actually connecting with people, connecting with God, also looked like different languages. My mum taught me French first, then Spanish, then Yoruba, and then English. So English is actually my fourth language. Wow. But in terms of faith, I guess I did grow up in the church, but not necessarily a free church. It was quite structured. But I did always feel that connection with God, even at a very young age. I did definitely felt his presence in my heart, even though I maybe wasn't always able to articulate it. And I remember so clearly, going to Sunday school and asking questions and just feeling safe. And then with my mum getting unwell, I wouldn't say it caused me for my faith to completely disappear, but it made me question God and who he was. And being adopted by pastors, I realized that my association with God was very much linked to my association with my mother, because that was my foundation of faith. So when my mother was kind of removed from the picture, I felt like I had lost my faith, and I felt like maybe God wasn't real. So I started to rebel, and I had these lovely people adopt me, but I felt like I didn't deserve that love. So I started to rebel. I run away. I put holes in their tires, and they never reacted. And these are Nigerian parents. So even with all the best intention, there should be a reaction. And they just kept on loving me and kept on loving me. And until the adoption was formalized, I still had to go to Roman Catholic Church. But in seeing their character, I then actually requested for myself to go visit their church, because I was like, I need to know what's happening there, because I don't understand why they're behaving like this. And I just remember feeling safe again. And I think God for me became safety. And in that safety, I was able to pursue an intimate relationship with God. And then when I was 16, I took that step for myself and got baptized.
Wow. So when there's trauma in a family, even if it just happens to one individual or it's spread, across the people in there, how do people cope? What are some of the things you've seen change, and how do people navigate that change?
Yeah. I think we have to recognize that families are groups. It's a group of people. There's many stories and perspectives. So when a trauma happens, even if it's just with one person in the family, everyone has their own reaction to it. And sometimes what happens is your trauma triggers my own stuff that's going on, which triggers someone else's stuff. And it can be really hard for people to be able just to take that step back as a family and to talk through what's going on here. How is this changing how we're relating to each other? How do we collectively grieve or collectively process this? And then actually, what does it mean to be a family going forward? And so it's easy to say, oh, you can follow certain steps. But in reality, in families, there's just a lot of people, not enough time to sit down, not enough courage to talk about those deep wounds. So actually, my thing is that the reality is when a trauma happens, it can take years to bring about healing, because who do you start with? Where do you begin? But it does begin with open conversations for sure, and someone having that courage to say, we have a problem here, we need to talk about this.
Yeah. And what's that look like in reality for you? Has there been a degree of healing within the family? Is it perhaps there's been a degree of healing and it's still complicated? I don't think it's necessarily one or the other, but just even from what MARYANE has said, have you experienced some of that healing time and like being able to sit together? And what has that looked like for you in real time?
It took a long time to get there. And I feel like literally the day that it started was my wedding day. My husband and I got married in 2020, but we didn't actually have our wedding until last year. And my dad hadn't actually spoken for probably about 3 years because of various things that they disagreed on. And then for me to walk downstairs in the hotel looking for breakfast, and I see them both sitting down, having a conversation, laughing. And I literally couldn't move. And this is the morning of my wedding. I don't know who's walking me down the aisle. I wanted both. And I think both wanted to individually walk me down. Literally till I came down. I didn't know until the moment I was about to step onto the aisle who was walking me down the aisle. I was literally freaking out. But yeah, I think that healing sometimes comes by letting God flow in your life. I think for many years I was trying, even though I had been put in a position where I felt like I was the adult of the situation, I think I didn't need to force the situation. I just needed to commit it to God and make sure in my behaviors I was respectful. And I think when I let go, that's when God just pieced everything together for that healing. And no, they're not best friends, but they respect each other. And they understand each of their roles in my life. And most importantly, my son's life. On my biological family side, that's their first grandson, their only grandchild at the moment. So, sometimes new life brings about healing as well.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. It's a beautiful story. And MARYANE, just in your practice and experience, you were speaking about the importance of family having that time to heal, but that it can take years. Are there some particular tools and things that you employ when you're working with people and techniques to help them to start that process of healing? And if so, could you just give us some examples of what that might look like?
Yeah, I think the first is just that awareness piece in terms of actually let me understand my story. Just like your story is rich, it's complex, there's so many layers to it. And just taking that step back and saying, actually, what is my story? And where are the broken threads in this? And actually then starting to identify how you've been shaped by the different encounters that you've had, how it has influenced your self-concept, how it influences how you relate to other people. So that whole awareness piece is step one. And then with that, being able to take it to God, actually going to God and saying, actually, these are all my broken pieces. And I need you to give me the strength to be able to walk this journey, which is painful.
Yeah.
And then once you've done that work on sort of self, then you can build the courage to then start having those conversations, because you can't have a conversation with family members if you haven't had it with yourself. Because where do you start? How do you articulate it? And so thinking about actually who is safe for me to approach. It might not be that you sit with all the parents, but you might start with one and you start finding that place of healing between maybe yourself and them. And then you start thinking about how do we make this a collective thing? And the collective thing is a thing that can take quite a while. Yeah. But first it starts off with self-journey. And then it starts off with who do I feel safe enough to have this initial conversation? And then bringing God into it, for sure. I was reading this article that said, people cry, but Christians lament. And I was like, well, what does that actually mean? And it's this idea of actually, in moments of weakness and true vulnerability, turning to God first, then going to him with your complaint and saying, God, my life has been so hard. It's been so complicated. And then just asking him for help and then just fully surrendering and trusting him. And that's what you really have to do in your own processing of things.
Yeah. And that in that lament, which obviously there's so many emotions involved in this process that you're speaking about, especially over sometimes a period of years where this journey has to happen. How have you sought to help families where they're doing their best, they may be coming for, they're seeking professional help, but in moments of anger when they're away from like the counselling room and just where those just really painful feelings, those complex feelings come to the fore, how do you help people to employ the tools in those moments?
Yeah.
How have you done that?
My goodness, and those moments are frequent. I think the most important thing is to recognize that you are human. You carry limitations and weaknesses. So in those moments where the emotions are just flooding in, there is no point trying to engage. And it's okay to say, you know what, I'm out. I'm just going to do me for a bit. Yeah. Because there's no point trying to deploy anything because you've got an emotional override. So usually I say to families in those moments, allow each other grace to just walk away and you can agree a time and a place to reconnect and to talk it through.
Yeah, in a safe way.
In a safe way, exactly. Because you need to process what's going on for you.
Yeah. And Regina, even in your story, obviously it's incredibly complicated, even though you've seen so much breakthrough. How have you been able to pick out which burdens were yours to carry and which weren't? Because I'm thinking about what MARYANE's just said about knowing ourselves and knowing even what our own struggles and pain are, being able to articulate that privately before we do that in a group. It can be sometimes hard where there's been trauma to know, okay, what's actually mine to carry and what's not, because we absorb each other's emotions and sometimes just each other's trauma. It can be hard to know what's mine and what's not. What has been your experience with figuring out what's yours to deal with, what's yours to carry, and what's yours to put aside?
I think it was when I felt I had hit breaking point, when I felt I could carry no more. My health actually wasn't always good at that point. I was working, it was COVID, and I literally broke down, like my body gave way to the point that the stress triggered an autoimmune disease. Wow. And I think when it got to that point, I said, it should have never gotten to that point. But I think it helped me untap through therapy that, I was a parentified child. So when you're a parentified child, you don't really think about your boundaries. You don't think about, what what you are responsible for and what others are responsible for. At 4 years old, no, it's not my responsibility to, you know, wake my mum up if she needs to be woken up and things like that. That wasn't my responsibility, but I grew up with that understanding. It took me a long time, and I'm still working through it. I'm still trying my best. And I think I have to ask God to check me, and I have to invite my relationships, my friends, my husband to hold me accountable with what are my boundaries. And there's actually a really good Christian book called Boundaries, which actually really helped me think about, wow, I have zero. I just keep going and going and going, and I say yes to everything. And it's not, I would convince myself that it's because I've got a good heart and I'm a loving person. But actually, it was probably driven from a deep insecurity. And that's something that I had to work through and overcome.
Yeah. So you were speaking earlier about even the complexity of just having so many different parents, and who do I turn to? Who do I listen to? In more recent years, as you've grown and you continue to heal, and you started your own family, what has honor and respect looked like for your parents? Because I think sometimes, I don't know how it is for you ladies, but sometimes growing up in the church, we think honor and respect is doing exactly what our parents say. Now, that's very complicated for you, because which parent and at what time? And I think it's a false understanding of what honor and respect can look like. So what have those two things looked like just in navigating your parental relationships?
I'm thinking about my wedding, because that was actually the most complex unraveling of everything, when one set of parents wants to plan it, opposed the other set. One set are saying, you know, we have raised you, we should have this honor. Another set are saying, you're our blood, we should have this honor. And really, I wanted it to be both, but that's just not where they were both at that time. And respect at that time looked like informing, listening, but still kind of saying, look, this is what my husband and I are going to do. And that may have looked at dishonor in some points, but now coming back through circle, they all believe that I did the right thing. And I think it's about, in your decision-making, consulting God and making sure your heart is in the right posture when you make those certain decisions, I think. Asking God to help me understand where they're at and not take that on, kind of linking to your previous point. For example, my adopted parents, you know, they were really upset about some things that they weren't involved in. They felt a bit distant, you know, from the planning process. You know, they were very excited for that as I grew up. And I felt I created that boundary to keep myself, you know, in line with what I was trying to do with my husband. And that was another relationship that I had to manage, and how he's seeing this all play out. So in honesty, I think it's respecting the person in terms of listening to their point of view, having that conversation. But at points when they don't want the conversation anymore, I have to go to God and navigate that with him and not take it on.
Yeah. MARYANE, what are your thoughts on that? Just in your, again, who you see in your practice, and maybe helping them, even if whether they're people of faith or not, in how we honor and respect people in our family, because I think that can be interpreted as, well, if you don't do this, like, that's dishonoring, or if you do this, that it's clearly not as straightforward as that. How do you help people to uncouple those sometimes old ideas?
It's very complex. I think, like what you said, I think we have to understand honor doesn't mean obedience, okay? And also, you are an adult child. So actually, in those situations, you have to make adult decisions that are rational and in the moment. And the same way, parents and siblings, etc., are also making their own adult decisions as well. So usually, when I'm working with clients, I'm talking about, actually, what are your values? What are the things that you believe to be true? And how do you ensure that you can uphold them as you're interacting with different family members and their needs and their values, which might not always align, actually. So there's something around being true to who you are Because when you lose your sense of self because you are trying to honor, the guilt that comes in, the shame, and then just this sense of uneasiness because you're betraying yourself, you're faking it to them, really. Yeah. And sometimes you're like, God, I am just faking this whole thing and I don't feel comfortable. I don't know whether I'm coming or going. So there's something important around authenticity and being true to the values that you are living out in this whole dynamic.
Yeah, and I think even in that, it was almost as if I was trying to protect everyone but myself. Being adopted and being adopted at 11, it's like you're living a double life. Half my friends know a set of parents and the other half of my friends know another set of parents. You know, if I go to Nigeria, they feel that I'm this person. If I'm in the UK, they feel I'm this person. And that was really, really difficult. And it's only now that I'm really starting to speak about my story. And some of my oldest friends are like, oh my goodness, like, so this is who you are. And I'm like, well, I was that person, but I just felt I couldn't express that side because, you know, I didn't want to embarrass one set of parents because there's the cultural element. There's the cultural element to identity. There's a cultural element of what is deemed as honor and respect. And, you know, in the Nigerian culture, it's quite extreme. So how are you meant to navigate that with multiple parents who all feel, you know, this is how I'm supposed to be respected?
So you were trying to protect them, but that's also quite difficult to know, well, where's my boundary in that? Where do I get to express myself? And what does that mean and look like? Just even with the bit that we've heard, the small part we've heard today of your story, I'm sure comparison has been a big thing for you growing up, comparing yourself to your friends' families and perhaps what their experiences have been and all of that kind of thing. And I wondered, like, now you've come on a journey, did you struggle with disappointment and comparing your family life, your family experience to those who seemed perhaps, we know there's no such thing as a normal family, but more normal?
You know what? No.
Okay.
And I've actually never been asked that question. But no, I've never desired anything other than a situation that I've been in, actually, because I just intrinsically know that this is what God wants me to go through. It's made me who I am. And I'm really, really grateful to God and proud of the person that I am. And I wouldn't want it any other way. And it has been a very painful and difficult journey. But in the mentoring that I do, in, you know, the people that, you know, I've been able to encounter and share my story with, it's been an honor to see lives changed. So no.
How have you found that kind of contentment?
Sometimes it wasn't always contentment. It also kind of felt like a burden. A burden that I carried, almost like, I know I'm supposed to do this, or I'm supposed to go through this. So yeah, it wasn't always contentment. But I think sometimes when you share, like we're sharing today, and when people respond to what you share, you find release. And actually, that's actually quite healing as well.
Yeah, amazing. So, Regina, we talked a little bit with MARYANE about the importance of family working together to heal over time. Have you been in a position where perhaps one family member just isn't ready to reconcile, they're not ready to forgive, or they're not ready to go through that healing? And if you have, what has that been like, and how have you gone on that journey on your own?
Yeah, I think on one level, it was really difficult with my biological mother. I was only 11 years old and I didn't quite understand the adoption process, if I'm being honest. And I think I had thought I had an open adoption, but it was actually closed. So when it came to points where I'm like, oh, but I miss my mom, I couldn't see her, and I struggled with that. And I would write her letters, and she would write me back, and she was really angry with me. She was really, really, really angry with me. And I tried to get the social workers to arrange a meeting, and for years she didn't actually want to speak to me. I had to, not necessarily that I did something wrong, because it was a process that was kind of above me. But I had to forgive myself for whatever I had put myself through in that process. And I had to allow God to enable me to forgive her, and God to enable me to understand the pain that she was going through. You know, for somebody to at least have been pregnant probably 8 times and then have 5 children. You have 2 daughters that passed away. You have 2 children that get adopted. And then your eldest son is being raised by another woman. As a woman, I pray I will never experience that. But she must have been wrecked. In fact, she was.
Yeah.
And in that, how can I be upset with her, but to love her more and to just pray for that reconciliation. And that reconciliation did come, and I'm thankful that it came before she passed. And we were able to get to a point where we were speaking regularly. But, you know, I will never have that conversation in terms of, I went through all of this and this is what it felt with me. And I don't think I'll have that with any of my parents, not because they aren't necessarily receptive. It would hurt them too much. And I don't think that always needs to be done, especially culturally in the Nigerian community. We don't do therapy. We don't do talking through feelings. And, you know, I've started to have those conversations with them, especially in light of having my own child. But I don't think everything needs to be unpacked with them when they're not there yet. Yeah. It would only punish them. It would only hurt them. It would only cause more trauma. So I have to go into my closet. I have to go through prayer. I have to do my own therapy, my own counselling, with myself, with my husband. And I have to allow God to use these different methods to heal me so that I'm not attaching that to somebody else.
Yeah. And MARYANE, how would you help if you were sat with Regina at that time before she figured this out in such an incredible way? If she's in a position where she wants to reconcile, move on, but another person isn't, how do you help people to deal with that in families?
Yeah. And that can be such a painful reality that you might never hear the words that you need from them. But there's something beautiful about actually realizing that it first starts off with you. It's your journey first, and you're not able to carry their burden, okay? They've got their stuff in a way. And there's something around actually being able to process, actually, what is it that I genuinely need from this situation? Is it that I need their understanding? Is it that I need their acceptance? Or do I need them to ask me for forgiveness? And knowing that you might never get that, and it's okay. And like you said, what was really beautiful was that you haven't done this on your own. God has been the one that has equipped you with the ability to be able to process this, to come to a place of recognition that actually this is as far as I can go, and I'm happy with that. Okay, if this is as far as I can go, I will take that. Okay, and so with clients, sometimes as far as you can go is to write a letter that never gets sent, and that's okay. You know, or as far as you can go is to have that conversation, but you get a negative response back. That's okay. You've done all that you can do. And it's that thing of actually, with all the resources that I have, I've done it all, and that's okay. And that's important. Yeah.
And while we're on kind of forgiveness and sometimes reconciliation, sometimes not, but that journey of forgiveness and boundaries, because sometimes there is a willingness for other family members to work together, to want to resolve or just to forgive and kind of move forwards. Can you talk a little bit to what does forgiveness look like with boundaries? Because I think sometimes there can be a real confusion and complication between the two.
Big time, big time. And actually with clients, that is a huge sore point. Oftentimes I find that forgiveness actually comes a lot quicker than we think. Clients are able to get to a place of saying, you know what, I'm going to let go of the debt that you owe me in my heart, and that's fine. But it's the keeping the boundaries that's really hard. So I'll have a client who'll say, I've forgiven my dad or I've forgiven my mum, but I don't actually want to talk to them. Yeah. I don't want to continue a relationship with them. And the question would come up in terms of, am I dishonoring God by doing that? What does that look like? But actually, you're keeping healthy boundaries because the boundaries allow you to honor them. Yeah. The boundaries keep you safe, and it actually keeps your image of them, whatever that looks like, intact. protect, because you know that through constant interaction, things might flare up and you're going to go right back to where you started. So seeing boundaries is something beautiful, actually, and very freeing, similar to the many boundaries in which God places us within. They're not designed to keep us shackled, but actually they're very freeing. It gives us a sense of safety. So knowing that you can forgive and you can keep healthy boundaries, they can coexist and it's okay.
Yeah.
And I can definitely see that in my own life, as even with my biological dad, we spent some time not speaking. And I created that boundary because I felt exactly what you're saying. I didn't want to tarnish how I saw him, and I could see where things were going in, at least in that season. And I remember someone telling me that, look, don't be angry, because he is being the best father that he knows how to be right now. And what that taught me is actually, I can actually teach him how to be a father to me.
Yeah.
As much as it may seem late in life, I can teach him what I like, what I need, you know, what are my interests, what I need from him. And that has been like a beautiful journey. Before I came into my family, my biological family, they didn't have dinner together. And now whenever we're all together, every meal we're having, you know, we have a lot of dinners together. And that's something that I love and I know they love. And, you know, me and my adopted dad are, me and my adopted dad, yes, but me and my biological dad are so close now. And he just understands me because I've had the boldness to teach him how to understand me. And I've sat back and watched him in order to understand him. And probably out of, you know, all of my siblings, we all have an individual relationship with him, but I feel like I've got a very deep one with him. And sometimes, you know, a period of no forgiveness actually can bring you to that point through reconciliation.
And I just want to add, I think we often think that the healing has to be quick. So the trauma journey takes a long time. But especially with the Christian hat on, we assume that, oh, once you've forgiven, things should bounce back. But actually the healing journey can sometimes take longer than the actual trauma journey. And so moving forward doesn't mean moving fast. I think that's important for all of us to hold as we navigate through that healing, for sure. Yeah,
that's great wisdom. And lastly, I would love to know, Regina, how did you reconnect with your biological family?
So it was Easter Sunday, 2012, which is to the day, exactly 10 years after my older sister had passed away. She passed away on Easter Sunday. And I was on, I don't know why, I was on Twitter, and I get a DM. It's a paragraph saying, hey, like, I'm Toby, you know, I think you're my sister. And I was like, answer these questions. I was like, when I was 4 years old and we were sitting in a car in Lagos, what was my favorite toy? What did I have? When's my birthday? I was asking all these different questions that only he would know. Answered every single one of them. And I was like, okay, send me a picture. And then I sent him a picture. I was like, oh my gosh, he's literally like, I'm him with a wig on. Literally that following week, my dad flew to London, and we met up. And then that summer, I went and spent, you know, the whole summer in America. That's where he lives. He's honestly one of my best friends. He's one of my husband's best friends. They're really, really close. My husband has 4 sisters. So he's always wanted a big brother. So it's lovely to see their relationship. But it's just amazing how, you know, God brought that together. And, you know, 10 years of my sister passing. And that was that day that my brother called my dad to say, I found my sister.
Wow.
That's the first time my dad cried after my sister passed. And it was almost like, you know, you're never going to replace that loss. But in me kind of coming back, it kind of helped him release and start his healing journey.
Yeah. Wow. And we have to know, who walked you down the aisle?
Both my dads walked me down the aisle. Yeah, both my dads walked me down, and it was the best. It was so beautiful. I was shaking, and then like my husband also didn't know, so he turned around and he just broke down. But yeah, it was such a beautiful day.
That must have been such a significant moment just for you all as a family.
Yeah, I mean, we'd been married for like over 2 years. So I was like, oh, we were actually going to cancel it. But I was like, I feel like we need this day for our family. And it honestly was just so God-filled. It was just beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. Well, ladies, thank you so much for sharing your story, your expertise. This has been so value-adding. I'm so excited to speak with you today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.